Welcome, Super Geeks, and let's take a look at using AWS Linux instances. You decide it's time to improve your IT skills. You've been looking at taking some courses on Linux, Windows, PowerShell, or maybe Nagios, but you don't have spare computers, and your personal computer is underpowered for running virtual computers on it. So, what is a person to do? Well, you can easily leverage Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. One of the services on AWS is EC2. On EC2, you can create virtual computers. If you have never used AWS services, you can sign up for a free year account. On the free account, you can create a number of computers for free, and even after the end of the first year, it is surprisingly inexpensive to maintain smaller computers on the AWS cloud. If you want to become an AWS Cloud Guru, you will want to find a good course on becoming an AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate to get a well-rounded base. However, I'm going to show you some basics for getting started creating and using an AWS Cloud Computer instance. So I'm starting at the main listing of all the AWS services. One thing I will note here is that you will want to set up a CloudWatch alert to monitor billing just in case you turn on something that costs money. I have mine set to send me an alert if I go over $10 in charges for a month. That way you don't get surprised. But setting that up is another video. The service we want to use is EC2, so I'm going to click on that. If this is your first time, you will see EC2 under the Compute Services. Once you have visited it, you will see it at the top under Recently Visited Services. Also, in the upper right corner, there is a drop-down for the availability zones. You can place your computer in a number of locations around the world, but usually you will want the zone geographically closest to you to reduce latency. So I'm choosing Ohio, and then I'm going to choose EC2. Now we are in the main dashboard for EC2. You can see there are a lot of options and features here. We are only going to touch on the most basic setup of a system. So now I'm going to create a new instance by clicking on Launch Instance. And here you're going to see a number of machine build images that are available. We have Amazon Linux instances, we have Ubuntu, SUSE, Red Hat Linux, a lot of them. If you scroll farther down, you will also notice there's some Windows Server instances available as well. So you can use this if you need to create a Windows server for like PowerShell or working on your MCSE. Also notice that a lot of these have free tier eligible listed. This means that you can make the machine and it's not going to cost you anything at this point. I'm also going to take a second here to click on AWS Marketplace and then software infrastructure, because I want to show you you can also make machines that have applications already built into them. An example would be WordPress certified by Bitnami, and this is also free tier eligible. Not all of them are free tier eligible, so you're going to want to keep an eye on that. For example, Cisco Cloud Services Router is a free trial, but that will cost you along with something like Palo Alto or Sophos. So let's go back to Quick Start, and then I'm going to go ahead and select Amazon Linux for my selection here. And with Amazon Linux, if you're using, let's say, a class on Nagios, what you're going to want to do is use the CentOS instructions or Red Hat instructions, because those would be basically the same. The second thing we have is the machine type, and the only one that is free tier eligible is a T2 Micro. And it's 1 CPU and 1 gig of memory, which sounds like not much. It's actually quite a bit for a lot of the purposes that you might need for training. And I'm going to go ahead and click Next for Configure Instance Details. Here, we're going to select just the defaults, but I want to point out IAM role. This would be if I wanted to connect this service, let's say, to an S3 bucket or something like that, I might have an IAM role set up for that. I'm going to go ahead and click for Add Storage. By default, it's going to give 8 gigabyte of storage. And this is general purpose SSD, so it's solid state storage, so it's actually very fast storage. You can increase the size of this. I could add additional volumes, and take a note here that for free tier eligible, you get up to 30 gigabyte of SSD or magnetic storage. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to add tags. In add tags, I always put a name tag on, and then I will give it a name for that server instance, so I kind of know what I'm using it for. And depending on what I'm doing, I'll come up with different kind of naming schemes for things. Let's say sometimes I'll use like different computers from named by different missions on the Mercury project, for example. So I might go Friendship 7 here, okay, which is one of the missions from the Mercury project. And then security groups. Now, security groups here, if you haven't done any security groups, you're going to have to create a new one. Basically, this is setting up what ports you're going to have open. By default, Amazon is deny all until you actually open things up. Now, you can create security groups, and I have a number of security groups that I've created over time that have different setups. If you are going in for the first time, what you're going to need to do is just name your group so that you can use it down the road and probably give it a good description. By default, this is going to set up for SSH inbound because this is a Linux instance and it knows that you need to be able to SSH into the system. And I'm going to call this my first demo, okay? And with SSH, it's going to be port 22. For source, here's one thing that I really like in using AWS is with this right now, it's set up so that it'll allow inbound port 22 from anywhere. But I can go ahead and come in here and click my IP, and it's going to give the IP address that AWS is seeing. And a lot of times I'll use different VPN systems, virtual private networks, to connect in and look like I'm coming from different places. If I'm at like a Starbucks or some place like that, I will use a VPN so that all my traffic is encrypted. And I might have to change that, but it will come up with my IP address and it will only accept an SSH connection from that IP address. So it limits it to just that one place. And now I'm going to go ahead and click on review and launch. And it gives me a review of this is the machine that I'm making, and then I can simply select launch. It comes up with one final step here, and this is for key pairs. Now, if this is your first time, you're going to need to create a new key pair. But if you have done this before, you'll have key pairs available. I'm going to choose Rusty AWS Linux, which is a key pair that I've made. And the key pairs are used for actually logging in. The public key will be put on any of your machines when you select the key pair, and the private key you need to keep local on your machine. And then here I'm going to acknowledge that I have access to the selected private key, and that's what I'm going to use to log in. If you're doing a Windows instance, you're going to use that private key along with the public key to generate the admin password for the RDP connection. And now I'm going to go ahead and launch instances. So my instance is now launching. If I go back to view instances, I will see Friendship 7 is pending, which means it's being built. Now, while that's being built, I have here my key, Rusty AWS Linux, and it's a .pem file, PEM. With a PEM file, I would be able to use this in a Linux instance to SSH in. If you're going to use a program like PuTTY, you have to actually go through and convert that to a PPK file. So what I do is load that file into PuTTY keygen. And you click load, you find the file name, and it'll load it in. And for the private key now, what I'm going to do is simply click on Save Private Key. And it's asking me if I want to save it without a passphrase. And in this case, I'm going to save it without a passphrase. And then it asks me where I want to put it. And I'm going to go ahead and put it on my desktop. And I'm going to call it Rusty AWS Linux.ppk. And at that point, I'll be able to use that file in with my Windows PuTTY program or other Windows-based SSH clients. Now I have that file loaded right down here below the other two. So in the process, while I was waiting for Friendship 7 to to initialize, I created that PPK file. You see it's in a running state, status check is initializing, but the instance is running now. So let's take a look at how we're going to go through and connect to it then real quick. If I click on Friendship 7, it brings up a whole bunch of information here. And what we're looking for is the public IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the public IP address, and I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to paste it into my host name or IP address section. Let me slide this up here a little bit. And the other thing I have to do now is I'm going to have to go in here and click on SSH or connection, then SSH, then auth. So I selected the PPK file that I have on my desktop, and it's listed there. I can go in here also, and under data, I can put EC2-user, because that's the user that by default AWS starts with on a machine. Once I get into the machine, I can create additional users, and then going forward, I can use them to connect. So I'm going to go ahead and move up then to session again, and I'm going to call this Friendship 7, just to give it a name, and I'm going to save this configuration. Now when I click on open, it's going to log into the machine, and let me slide this up here, ended up on my other desktop. So it's going to, by default, since this is the first time in, talk about the server host key. I'm going to go ahead and accept it. And then let me slide this window up, and it's actually gone in and logged in as the EC2 user into my Amazon Linux system. And I can do an LS, I can do pwd. So you can see that I am in on this Linux box. So this is how you go ahead and set up a AWS instance, Linux instance, so that you can use it for different training and practicing and have it up on the Amazon system.